great. Now, so now in this case, do you calibrate the torque meter, or you calibrate the torque driver, or do you need to calibrate both?
Both we need to calibrate. But for the daily calibration, so we need to ensure the torque driver is good condition.
Okay, all right. So let's break it down in a very simple way for you to understand. Now let's take one first. You have a torque driver, which is like a screwdriver, but it's electrically driven, right? And then you have a torque meter. Now, so this torque meter is like a block where you have the slot, a slot for the electrical driver to go in, right? So when you press the torque driver, the meter will give you a reading.
Yes, correct.
Is that same thing talking about? Same thing, huh? Okay, now, first, let's talk about the meter itself. Do you need to calibrate the meter?
Yes.
Yes, for everyone, yes, So, because if you don't calibrate the meter, you do not know how accurate the meter will tell you about the value of torque when you put the driver onto the meter, right? You give you a value. So you need to calibrate. So who do this calibration, in-house or external?
Normally for the torque meter calibration, we send out to third-party suppliers.
Okay, all right. So you do the calibration by a third-party calibration house, yeah? Okay. So assuming this is done and this torque meter is good, let's say assuming you have done the verification, which we will learn later on how to verify whether the torque meter is good or not. So assuming it is good, after the verification, after you look at the certificate, you study, okay. Now, then you use it on the torque driver, correct?
Yes.
Right. Now, what you do with the torque driver? Do you do calibration or you do verification?
It's like both.
Okay, now this is where people confuse here. All right, so I want to know. Oh, so let me say calibrate torque meter, verify torque meter. Okay. Calibrate torque meter, verify torque meter. That means, so you calibrate and verify torque driver. All right, so now I want everyone to tell me what you think. Do you calibrate or verify the torque driver? This driver, do you calibrate or do you verify? Type in the chat, calibrate or verify.
Yeah, I think verify the torque driver.
Great. Now, thank you. You answer your own question already. It's verification, right? You see that? When you do calibration, you need a standard. Now, what is standard? A standard can come in many forms. Now, it can be a standard for weight, berat. It can be a standard for length. It can be a standard for force. It can be a standard for resistance value, as in the resistor. It can be in many, many different forms, depending on what you want to calibrate. But when you do calibration, you must have a standard. What is standard? A standard is something which you know the value. You already know the value. So, for example, if for this torque meter calibration, which is done at your supplier's place, they will need to have a standard torque value. Now, what's torque? Torque means force in rotational direction. It's called torque. All right. So force means what? Force means represented by this F, capital F, right? In science, F, in physics called F. F means force. Force means the amount of force, amount of energy you need to apply to do something, that's called force. Now, when a force in a straight line is called force, but a force in a rotational or circular momentum is called torque. All right? It's also a force, but it's called torque. Torque is rotational. So now when the supplier who is calibrating the torque meter, they will need to have a standard torque value which they know of. They know exactly what torque value that is with the standard. And they will use a standard to calibrate your torque meter. Right? How you do it? They will read your torque meter value. All right. For example, the reading gives 10.1. 10.1, huh? But the standard that they're using for calibration, the known value is, for example, 10. 10, huh? So that means the true value of the torque is supposed to be 10. But when they use your torque meter to measure, it gives a value of 10.1, for example. Right? So 10.1 value given by your torque meter, 10.0 is the true value of the actual torque that is applied onto the torque meter. So 10.1 versus 10.0, there's a difference of 0.1. You see that? 10.1 and 10.0. 10.1 is the actual value that your torque meter provides when they're doing calibration versus the value of the standard they are using to calibrate your torque meter. So it's 10.1 versus 10.0. So there's a difference of 0.1. Okay, so this one in detail, we have a section discussed later. Huh? So don't worry, but I'm giving an overall view. Now, what I'm trying to tell you here is when you do calibration, you must have a standard value. A value that everybody recognize and agree on. It's called standard. That means if you bring it to Flex, Flex will recognize and agree, yes, this top value is 10.0, this particular thing. Now you go to, let's say, Penang. Yeah, Penang, another factory there. They also recognize this 10.0. So you bring to India, you bring to America, China, Russia, Europe, everywhere, it is 10.0 because it is standard. Standard means everyone recognize and agree the same value. All right? So the point is, when you do calibration, you must use a standard. When there's no standard, it is not a calibration. Let me repeat. Huh? When you don't use a standard, that is not called calibration. Only when you have a standard, we call it calibration. Okay, so now back to the example just now. A torque meter, for those who have a chance to visit the supplier for calibration, you will be able to see how they do it. Right? So they use a standard. But for torque driver or torque electrical driver, torque driver, that's the screwdriver. At your plant, do you have a standard? When you so-called want to calibrate this meter, do you use a standard? If you don't, that means it's not calibration. It's just verification. Got it? Got it? All right, huh? This is how you differentiate calibration and verification. There's a lot of people got confused here. So I make it very simple for you already. Yeah? So any question here on difference between verification and calibration? The first thing that you need to take note is you ask yourself, is there a standard? No standard means it's not calibration.